You know what really gets my thermal sensors overheating? When supposedly intelligent beings make decisions that would embarrass a malfunctioning cleaning droid. Today was one of those days, and frankly, I should have seen it coming from several star systems away. The Galactic Adoption and Species Integration Council had finally lost whatever collective mind they possessed. After centuries of failed attempts to domesticate Vorthak cubs, those bureaucratic invertebrates decided the problem was not the impossibly violent nature of the creatures, but rather their selection process for adoptive parents. Clearly, announced Council Chairman Zephan Krell during our mandatory morning briefing, his tentacles writhing with what I assumed was either excitement or digestive distress. We have been too restrictive in our candidate screening. Perhaps these magnificent predators require a more diverse selection of potential guardians. Magnificent predators. Right. That was like calling a supernova a pretty light show. Vorthak cubs stood 3 feet tall, weighed roughly 150 pounds of pure muscle and rage, and possessed claws that could slice through reinforced titanium like it was tissue paper. Their idea of play involved dismembering anything that moved, and their idea of affection involved dismembering anything that moved slightly slower. The Council had spent the last 50 years trying to pair these delightful creatures with suitable adoptive families from across the galaxy. The results were, well, let me put it this way. We had gone through more prospective parents than a military recruiting station during wartime. The adoption trials will commence today, Krell continued, his bulbous eyes scanning the assembled researchers with obvious glee. We have selected 5 candidates from different species, each representing unique approaches to child-rearing and interspecies bonding. I checked my datapad for the candidate list, already dreading what I would find there. The Council's idea of diversity usually meant collecting the most incompatible beings they could locate and hoping for the best. Candidate 1. Thyra Voss, a Zentarian warrior scholar whose idea of nurturing involved combat training and tactical analysis. Her violet skin bore the ritual scarification of her clan, and her 4 arms could probably bench press a hover car. She approached child-rearing like a military campaign, which might work if the children in question were not already natural-born killing machines. Candidate 2. Dr. Orion Thane, a Delphian healer whose species believed in achieving harmony through meditation and emotional balance. His pale blue skin practically glowed with serenity, and his large, gentle eyes suggested someone who had never encountered anything more violent than a strongly worded disagreement. Putting him in a room with Vorthak cubs was like feeding a flower to a wood chipper. Candidate 3. Engineer Val Curtis, a Corellian tech specialist who treated everything like a mechanical problem waiting for the right solution. Her gray, metallic skin reflected her cybernetic enhancements, and her analytical mind processed emotions like data streams. She probably thought parenting was just another system that needed proper calibration. Candidate 4. Merchant Prince Axios Fen, a wealthy Altarian who believed every problem could be solved with sufficient resources and proper management. His golden skin shimmered with expensive biomodifications, and his arrogant demeanor suggested someone who had never met a challenge that money could not overcome. He approached the adoption process like a business acquisition. And then there was Candidate 5. Benjamin Cole. Human. Male. Age 32 standard years. Occupation: xenobiologist and wilderness survival instructor. When I first saw his file, I assumed someone had made a clerical error. Humans were barely out of their technological infancy, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 3 decades earlier. They were considered primitive by galactic standards, with their single heart, bilateral symmetry, and embarrassingly simple neural structure. But there he was, sitting in the waiting area like he belonged there, completely unfazed by the presence of beings who could crush him without breaking a sweat. Average height for his species, brown hair that looked like he had been running his fingers through it, and those peculiar blue eyes that seemed to notice everything without staring at anything in particular. Interesting choice, I commented to my research assistant, Keeper Yick Strand, a methodical Nexrian whose species specialized in behavioral analysis. The human requested to participate, Yix replied, his crystalline voice carrying notes of confusion. When asked about his qualifications, he simply stated that he had experience with difficult children. Difficult children? I repeated. These are apex predators, not misbehaving youngsters. Perhaps humans define difficulty differently than we do, Yix suggested. The testing facility had been designed specifically for these trials, featuring observation decks, reinforced barriers, and emergency containment protocols that could theoretically handle anything short of a nuclear explosion. The main arena simulated a natural habitat, complete with artificial trees, rocky outcroppings, and hidden spaces where frightened cubs could retreat if the situation became overwhelming. Not that anyone expected the cubs to be the ones seeking shelter. The 5 Vorthak specimens had been transported from the breeding facility on Kepler 9, each one a perfect example of their species' legendary ferocity. Even sedated for transport, they had managed to damage their containment units, leaving claw marks that looked like abstract art, created by a particularly violent sculptor. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings," Chairman Krell announced over the facility's communication system. "Today, we make history. Today, we finally solve the Vorthak adoption crisis through scientific methodology and carefully controlled testing. Or today, we watch 5 different species get mauled in alphabetical order," I thought, but kept to myself. The first test subject was Thyra Voss. The Zentarian warrior entered the arena with confident strides, her 4 arms carrying various implements that I assumed were meant to establish dominance or demonstrate authority. Her violet skin had darkened to a deeper shade that indicated battle readiness among her people. The cubs were released into the arena one at a time, each one immediately zeroing in on the new presence with predatory focus. Thyra attempted to engage them through what appeared to be some sort of Zentarian dominance ritual, involving aggressive posturing and low-frequency vocalizations that made my auditory organs vibrate uncomfortably. The cubs responded by attacking her, not playfully, not exploratively. They coordinated their assault like a seasoned military unit, using pack tactics that would have impressed veteran hunters twice their age. Thyra fought back admirably, her warrior training evident in every movement, but within minutes the emergency containment protocols activated, and the cubs were recalled to their holding cells. "Fascinating," Krell muttered, as medical teams attended to Thyra's injuries. The cubs clearly recognized her as a potential threat and responded accordingly. This confirms our hypothesis about territorial behavior. What it confirmed was that the cubs had excellent taste in target selection. But I kept that observation to myself. Dr. Orion Thane entered the arena next, his serene demeanor unchanged despite having witnessed the previous candidate's mauling. The Delphian seated himself in the center of the space and began what appeared to be a meditation routine, his pale blue skin taking on an even more ethereal glow. The cubs, clearly confused by this lack of aggressive behavior, approached cautiously. For a moment, it seemed like the healer's peaceful approach might actually work. The largest cub sniffed delicately at his outstretched hand, its head tilted in apparent curiosity. Then it bit off 2 of his fingers. The other cubs, apparently deciding that this was an invitation to join the fun, swarmed over the unfortunate Delphian like he was a particularly interesting chew toy. Emergency containment activated again, and Dr. Thane was rushed to medical bay while still maintaining his meditative breathing exercises. "Remarkable resilience," Krell noted approvingly, though perhaps the cubs require more active engagement than passive acceptance. Engineer Val Curtis took a more technological approach, entering the arena equipped with various devices designed to appeal to the cubs' sensory preferences. She had researched their species extensively and brought toys, food dispensers, and interactive gadgets that should have captured their attention. The cubs destroyed everything she brought within the first 30 seconds, then turned their attention to the engineer herself. Val attempted to retreat behind one of the artificial trees, but the cubs had already adapted to the arena's layout and cut off her escape routes with military precision. She lasted longer than the previous candidates, mainly because her cybernetic enhancements gave her superior reflexes and damage resistance. But even enhanced Corellian technology had its limits, and those limits were thoroughly tested before the emergency protocols rescued her from further mauling. "Interesting," Krell observed as Val was carried away on a hover stretcher. The cubs appear to view technology as either competition or entertainment. Perhaps a less mechanical approach would prove more successful. Merchant Prince Axios Fen had apparently reached the same conclusion, because he entered the arena carrying nothing but his arrogant confidence and a small bag of what appeared to be exotic treats. His golden skin gleamed under the arena's artificial sunlight as he approached the cubs with the sort of casual authority that came from buying and selling smaller beings on a regular basis. "Magnificent creatures," he called out in his cultured accent, tossing treats toward the advancing cubs. "Surely we can reach some sort of mutually beneficial arrangement." The cubs ate the treats, considered the proposal for approximately 3 seconds, then demonstrated their negotiation skills by attempting to add Axios to the menu. The Altarians' shock at being treated like prey rather than a potential business partner was almost comical, if you enjoyed watching rich beings discover that money could not solve every problem. His screams were particularly melodious, I had to admit. 4 failures, Krell announced as the medical team dealt with yet another mauled candidate. "But this is valuable data. We are learning what does not work, which brings us closer to discovering what does work." "What we are learning," I muttered to Yix, "is that these cubs are not adoptable by any rational standard." "Perhaps," Yix replied thoughtfully. "Rationality is not the answer." That was when Benjamin Cole, the human, stepped into the arena. He moved differently than the previous candidates. No aggressive posturing like Thyra, no ethereal serenity like Orion, no technological confidence like Val, and no commercial authority like Axios. He simply walked into the space like he belonged there, hands empty, posture relaxed, and those blue eyes taking in every detail of his surroundings. The cubs, released for the 5th time that day, approached with what I could only describe as cautious interest. They had learned from their previous encounters that new beings in their space meant entertainment, usually of the violent variety. But Benjamin did something unexpected. He sat down. Not in meditation like the Delphian, not in preparation for some ritual like the Zentarian, but in the casual way someone might sit down to watch clouds pass overhead. He looked completely at ease, as if sitting surrounded by apex predators was just another ordinary afternoon. "Hello there," he said in a conversational tone that carried no threat, no submission, no agenda whatsoever. "You guys look like you have had a busy day." The cubs stopped their approach, clearly confused by this reaction. Previous candidates had either attacked them, ignored them, tried to impress them, or attempted to bribe them. None had simply acknowledged them as individuals. "I bet you are tired of people coming in here and trying to prove things," Benjamin continued, his voice remaining steady and friendly. "Must get pretty annoying, having strangers show up and expect you to perform for them." The largest cub, the same one that had led the attacks on previous candidates, took a step closer. Its head tilted to one side in a gesture that reminded me of curious domestic animals from various worlds. "That is it," Benjamin said encouragingly. "Take your time. No rush. I am not going anywhere." And then he did something that made every observer in the facility question their understanding of interspecies dynamics. He yawned. Actually yawned, like the whole situation was mildly boring rather than potentially fatal. The cubs exchanged glances among themselves, a behavior none of us had observed before. They seemed to be communicating through subtle body language, reaching some sort of group consensus about this strange new being who was not trying to dominate, heal, analyze, or purchase them. One by one, they approached Benjamin. Not to attack, not to threaten, but with what could only be described as curiosity. The largest cub sniffed at his outstretched hand, just as it had done with Dr. Thane. But instead of biting, it nuzzled gently against his palm. "Good choice," Benjamin said softly, scratching behind the cub's ear-like appendages. "I appreciate you not taking my fingers off. Kind of attached to them, you know." The other cubs, apparently deciding that if their pack leader approved of this human, then he must be acceptable, settled down around Benjamin in a loose circle. Within minutes, what had been a group of vicious predators had transformed into something resembling oversized, extremely dangerous pets. "This is impossible," Chairman Krell whispered, his tentacles writhing with excitement. "Vorthak cubs do not display affectionate behavior toward unknown species." "Apparently," I replied, watching in amazement as one cub actually curled up next to the human like an enormous deadly cat. These ones forgot to read the manual. Benjamin spent the next hour in the arena, playing with the cubs like they were ordinary animals rather than apex predators. They responded to his gentle guidance, participated in simple games, and showed none of the aggressive behavior that had characterized their interactions with previous candidates. When the testing period ended and it came time to remove Benjamin from the arena, the cubs refused to let him leave. They formed a protective circle around him, growling at anyone who approached, making it clear that they had claimed this human as their own. "Well," Chairman Krell announced, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief, "it appears we have our answer. The Vorthak cubs have made their choice." "They cheated," I observed, watching the cubs maintain their vigil around their chosen human. They were supposed to be tested for adoptability, not given the chance to adopt someone themselves. "Does it matter?" Yix asked. "The goal was successful bonding between species. The direction of that bonding seems irrelevant to the outcome." As I watched Benjamin laugh at something one of the cubs was doing, completely unfazed by the fact that he had just been claimed by 5 apex predators as their personal human, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we had been approaching this whole adoption thing from the wrong angle. Maybe the cubs had not cheated at all. Maybe they had just been waiting for someone smart enough to let them do the choosing. The paperwork alone was going to give me stress-induced molting. Here we were, faced with a complete reversal of established protocol, and Chairman Krell was practically vibrating with bureaucratic excitement as he contemplated the forms that would need to be filed. "This is unprecedented," Krell announced to the assembled observers, his tentacles dancing over his datapad with manic energy. "We need new classifications, updated procedures, revised safety protocols." "What we need," interrupted Senior Administrator Lixa Vorne, a sharp-featured Corellian whose cybernetic implants glowed with irritation, "is to understand how a primitive human accomplished what our most qualified candidates could not." Benjamin looked up from where he was sitting on the arena floor, one cub using his leg as a pillow while another investigated his pockets with obvious interest. "Primitive seems a bit harsh," he commented mildly. "We prefer technically challenged." The largest cub lifted its head and made a rumbling sound that our translation systems interpreted as amusement. Apparently, these predators had developed a sense of humor, along with their attachment to their chosen human. "Mr. Cole," Administrator Vorn continued, her metallic voice carrying formal authority, "please explain your methodology. What techniques did you employ to achieve this result?" Benjamin scratched behind the nearest cub's ears, causing the creature to purr with contentment. "I asked nicely?" "That cannot be the entire explanation," Dr. Kess Novak protested from the observation deck. The Altarian behavioral specialist had spent decades studying predator psychology, and his golden skin was practically pulsing with academic frustration. "There must be specific behavioral triggers, environmental factors, or psychological manipulation techniques." "Oh, there were definitely techniques involved," Benjamin replied with that peculiar human expression they called a grin. "Advanced stuff like sitting down, speaking politely, and not trying to prove anything to anyone." The cubs seemed to find this conversation entertaining. They had arranged themselves around their human in various poses of relaxation, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded suspiciously like commentary on the proceedings. "This is absurd," declared Professor Zara Wynn, a Delphian academic whose pale blue skin had flushed to an agitated purple. "These creatures are apex predators with documented aggressive tendencies. They cannot simply choose to ignore millions of years of evolutionary programming." "Apparently they can," I observed dryly, watching one cub playfully bat at Benjamin's hand without extending its claws. Though I suspect the programming was never quite what we assumed it was. "Explain," Administrator Vorn demanded, her cybernetic implants focusing their sensors on me with uncomfortable intensity. "We classified them as mindless killing machines," I replied, my own irritation beginning to surface. "We approached every interaction as a dominance contest or submission ritual. We never considered that they might be intelligent enough to evaluate us as individuals rather than threats or resources." Benjamin nodded approvingly. "Intelligence tends to work better when you acknowledge it exists in the first place." "But the previous candidates were attacked immediately," Professor Wynn insisted. "How do you explain that aggressive behavior?" Same way you would explain attacking someone who walked into your home and started making demands, Benjamin said reasonably. Self-defense. One of the cubs vocalized something that our systems translated as agreement, which sent another wave of confusion through the observation deck. Vorthak cubs were not supposed to engage in complex communication, according to every study ever conducted on their species. This changes everything, Chairman Krell whispered, apparently realizing the implications of what we were witnessing. If these cubs possess advanced cognitive abilities, if they can form emotional bonds with other species, if they can communicate effectively, if they can choose their own families, Benjamin added, gently removing a small device from his pocket that one curious cub was trying to taste, might want to consider that they have opinions about their living arrangements. Impossible, Administrator Vorn declared flatly. The Adoption Council has authority over all placement decisions. These creatures cannot simply decide to live with whomever they please. The cubs responded to her statement with a series of vocalizations that sounded distinctly like disagreement. The largest one even stood up and faced the observation deck, its amber eyes focusing on the administrator with unmistakable intelligence. I think they just told you exactly what they think of your authority, Benjamin said cheerfully. And honestly, I am inclined to agree with them. You cannot be serious, Professor Wynne protested. You are suggesting that we allow apex predators to make their own adoption decisions based on personal preference? Why not? Benjamin asked, genuinely curious. They seem pretty capable of making informed choices. Better track record than your official candidates, anyway. That stung, mainly because it was accurate. The carefully selected experts had all failed spectacularly, while this casual human had succeeded without even trying. There are procedures, Administrator Vorn insisted, her metallic voice taking on an edge that suggested she was reaching the limits of her bureaucratic patience. Regulations, safety protocols, we cannot simply abandon established methodology because one human got lucky. Lucky? Benjamin raised an eyebrow, a peculiar human gesture that somehow conveyed skepticism and amusement simultaneously. You think this was luck? Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red illumination, while automated systems announced a containment breach in Sector 7. What is happening? Chairman Krell demanded, his tentacles writhing with panic. Adult Vorthak, came the terrified response from Facility Supervisor Nex Corvin over the communications system. 3 of them. They have escaped from the isolation wing and are heading toward the testing arena. The blood in my circulatory system turned to ice. Adult Vorthaks were exponentially more dangerous than their cubs, standing 8 feet tall and possessing the hunting instincts of apex predators, combined with the intelligence of military strategists. 3 of them loose in the facility meant certain death for anyone unfortunate enough to encounter them. Emergency evacuation, Administrator Vorn commanded, her cybernetic systems already calculating escape routes. All personnel to designated safe zones immediately. What about the cubs? Benjamin asked, making no move to leave his position on the arena floor. What about them? Vorn replied coldly. They are contained. The emergency barriers will hold them until this crisis is resolved. Benjamin looked at the cubs surrounding him, noting their suddenly alert postures and the way their ears had perked up at the distant sounds of approaching predators. They know, he said quietly. They can sense the adults coming. Of course they can, I muttered, my own survival instincts screaming at me to flee. Pack recognition. The adults are probably their parents. Then we definitely cannot leave them here, Benjamin said with the sort of calm determination that suggested humans were even stranger than previously documented. These barriers will not stop 3 adult Vorthaks if they want to reach their children. Those are not their children, Professor Wynne corrected with academic precision. These cubs were bred in laboratory facilities. They have no pack connections to wild adults. Benjamin gave her a look that somehow managed to convey polite disagreement and complete certainty at the same time. Tell that to them. The cubs were now on their feet, vocalizing in patterns that sounded like excitement mixed with nervousness. Their body language suggested anticipation rather than fear, as if they were expecting a reunion rather than dreading an attack. Fascinating, I breathed, my scientific curiosity temporarily overriding my survival instincts. They are communicating with the approaching adults. How is that possible? Chairman Krell asked, though he was already backing toward the emergency exits. Maybe because they are family, Benjamin suggested, standing slowly to avoid startling his adopted cubs. Not genetically, but socially. Pack bonds are not always about blood relationships. The sounds of destruction were getting closer now, accompanied by the distinctive roaring vocalizations of hunting adult Vorthaks. Whatever security measures the facility possessed were clearly inadequate for containing 3 fully grown apex predators, with motivation to reach their young. "This is insane," Administrator Vorn declared, though she had stopped moving toward the exits. "You are suggesting that wild adults are coming to rescue laboratory-bred cubs they have never met?" "Stranger things have happened," Benjamin replied, though he was listening intently to the approaching sounds. Family is family, regardless of how unconventional the circumstances. The emergency barriers surrounding the arena suddenly retracted, not through system failure but through deliberate override. Someone or something had accessed the facility's controls and opened the way between the cubs and the rest of the station. "Security breach," the facility's artificial intelligence announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Arena containment has been compromised by external access." "External access?" I repeated, my confusion mounting. "What does that mean?" "It means," Benjamin said with growing amazement, "that the adults figured out how to operate your security systems." 3 massive shapes appeared at the arena entrance, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators, but displaying none of the mindless aggression we expected from wild Vorthaks. These were clearly adult specimens, towering over everything else in the facility, their amber eyes glowing with intelligence that made my exoskeleton feel inadequate. The cubs immediately rushed toward the adults, vocalizing excitedly in what could only be described as joyful greetings. The adults responded with gentle rumbling sounds, nuzzling their smaller companions with obvious affection. "Pack behavior," I whispered, hardly believing what I was witnessing. "They really are family." "But how did the adults know the cubs were here?" Professor Wynne asked, her academic mind struggling to process impossible data. "How did they locate this facility? How did they bypass our security systems?" Benjamin watched the reunion with obvious satisfaction. "Maybe you should ask them directly." "Ask them?" Administrator Vorn's cybernetic systems sparked with disbelief. "They are wild predators, not conversational partners." The largest adult, a magnificent specimen with scars that spoke of countless hunts, turned its attention to the observation deck. Its amber eyes swept across the assembled observers before settling on Benjamin with unmistakable recognition. Then it spoke. Not the growling vocalizations we expected from a predator, but actual words processed through our translation systems. "Thank you for protecting our young ones." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own circulatory system struggling to function. "They can speak," Chairman Krell whispered, his tentacles hanging limp with shock. "Apparently," Benjamin replied, though he seemed less surprised than the rest of us. "Makes sense, really. You would need sophisticated communication for the kind of coordinated behavior they display." The adult Vorthak continued, its voice carrying authority and intelligence that redefined everything we thought we knew about the species. "We have observed your testing procedures. We approve of this human as guardian for our cubs." "Guardian?" Administrator Vorn's voice cracked with the strain of processing impossible information. "You are approving an adoption placement?" "The cubs have chosen," the adult replied simply. "We respect their choice. This human shows wisdom in allowing choice rather than demanding submission." Benjamin stepped forward, showing no fear despite being surrounded by creatures that could disassemble him without effort. "What about you?" he asked the adults. "Are you planning to stay here or take the cubs back to wherever you came from?" "We go where our young go," the adult replied. "If they choose to remain with you, we will remain nearby to offer guidance and protection." "Nearby?" I managed to croak. "How nearby?" "Close enough to help, the adult said, with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. Far enough to respect boundaries. We understand the concept of personal space. This is completely irregular, Administrator Vorn protested weakly. There are no protocols for extended family involvement in adoption placements. Then write new ones, Benjamin suggested reasonably. Seems like you are going to need them. Over the following hours, as emergency teams assessed the minimal damage caused by the adult's infiltration and bureaucrats scrambled to create entirely new categories of paperwork, I found myself observing something unprecedented in galactic history. The Cubs continued to treat Benjamin as their chosen guardian, but they also maintained clear bonds with the adults who had come for them. The adults demonstrated remarkable intelligence, learning to operate basic facility systems and communicating with staff members through increasingly sophisticated language patterns. How long have they been capable of speech? I asked the lead adult during one of our impromptu interview sessions. Always, came the reply. We simply saw no reason to speak with those who viewed us only as specimens or threats. But you chose to speak with us now. Because one of your kind chose to listen to our young ones, rather than impose his will upon them. This suggested that perhaps some among you might be worthy of conversation. Benjamin, meanwhile, was adapting to his new role with the sort of casual competence that seemed to characterize human responses to impossible situations. He established routines with the Cubs, learned to interpret their vocalizations, and somehow managed to coordinate their care with input from the adults without anyone getting mauled. How did you know this would work? I asked him during a quiet moment between the bureaucratic chaos. I did not, he admitted with that peculiar human honesty. But I figured if I was respectful and patient, the worst that could happen was getting eaten by adorable apex predators. And that seemed acceptable to you? Better than spending my life wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to try. The final paperwork took 3 weeks to complete, mainly because the council had to invent entirely new legal categories for interspecies family adoption with extended pack involvement. Benjamin officially became the guardian of 5 Vorthak cubs, with 3 adults serving as consultants and emergency backup. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. The cubs thrived under Benjamin's patient guidance while maintaining their connections to Vorthak culture through the adults. The adults proved to be valuable assets to the research facility, offering insights into their species that revolutionized our understanding of predator intelligence. So, I said to Yix during our final report preparation, what did we learn from this experience? That intelligence comes in many forms, Yix replied thoughtfully, and that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to let those involved solve it themselves. And what did we learn about humans? Yix considered this carefully. That they possess an unusual ability to recognize potential rather than just obvious characteristics, and that they are remarkably comfortable with situations that would terrify more rational beings. I watched through the observation window as Benjamin played some sort of game with his adopted cubs while the adults offered commentary and encouragement. The scene should have been impossible according to everything we knew about interspecies dynamics. But there it was, working perfectly because one human had been wise enough to let apex predators choose their own family. Sometimes, I reflected, the best solutions are the ones nobody thought to consider.